Argentina make history, beating the All Blacks at home for the first time in their history as the Springboks bounce back to beat the Wallabies in Cape Town. And the Rugby World Cup begins in England. This is the Ruck and Roll show. My name's Adam Gaston. I'm joined by Leach, who's back on the show this week, who's actually been working at the Women's Rugby World Cup. Dom, how are you getting on?
It's good fun. I'm working on as part of the logistics side with the World Cup. So a lot of my day-to-day stuff just kind of involves moving stuff for people, making sure that when the players arrive, they're well hydrated, they've got their ice and stuff. I'm based at Franklin's Gardens in Northampton, and this weekend we had Ireland versus Japan and South Africa versus Brazil, which was really good to experience.
Sounds like a great experience, and there's definitely a great atmosphere going on around England. I mean, you watched that before we go into Rugby Championship stuff. You watched that first game, and the atmosphere there, I mean, that was the highest ever attendance for a Women's Rugby World Cup game, I believe, at the Stadium of Light. It was just a great buzz.
Yeah, the atmosphere's been awesome. Like, I mean, there's probably only 15 to 18,000 people at the Northampton game when it was Ireland, Japan, and Brazil, South Africa playing. So yeah, when they came, not a massive crowd, but the atmosphere was still buzzing. Like, everyone was chanting. Everyone, it wasn't like everyone was backing one team or like there was a big outsway. Like, obviously the South African fans, they came out in their numbers and probably gave it a big one. But everybody was still cheering on Brazil. Like, they managed to get two penalties and get 6 points, and I think their aim was just don't get nilled. And the crowd roar when the penalties got scored. It was amazing. So yeah, it's been really good. And like I say, just kind of getting to be part of it and see how it all goes. And hopefully when England play there at the weekend, I'll get to see a couple of famous faces.
That was it. Can't wait. That game against Samoa, of course, coming up this weekend. So that'll be the second game after their big hit out against the USA, quite literally 69-17. At the Stadium of Light. But we'll move into the Rugby Championship chat. We'll start first with the Springboks, who do bounce back in Cape Town, as a lot of people were sort of backing them to do, including myself. But it was a close game, Dom, wasn't it? 30 points to 22. They came out with sort of like a more pragmatic approach, more sort of, I guess, a more Springboks-like approach, where they sort of kept it in a wee bit tighter rather than an expansive game they were playing the week before, and they sort of got those 6 points on the board. And then from then on there, it was quite switched back, and it was quite a sort of back and forth game, very scrappy game. Sort of from then, Australia scoring that try in the first half through Corey Toole on debut after a lovely grubber kick from Nick White. And then the Springboks came right back with Kane and Moody after a lovely crossfield kick from Andre Pollard. And then, of course, another try towards the end of the half from Quagga Smith, who bundled over to score under the post to make it 27 before that O'Connor kick to make it 20-10 at halftime. What did you sort of make of that first half from the Wallabies? Because they didn't get blown away by any stretch, but they were sort of going into halftime at 20-10 down. But it was an interesting sort of way to see, really.
Yeah, I think Australia were just it was a similar story to what happened when they had the Lions in the second test, I believe. They had a couple of early injuries and it probably just knocked them off their path a little bit. Nick White coming off, 15 minutes in, basically. That's a big loss, especially when he, performed so well in the first game against South Africa. So yeah, it was definitely probably a knock of confidence as kind of, what do we do now? But equally, them being professionals, they'll have their game plan so they can adapt when McDermott comes on. But it like you say, they weren't blown away. They played their game very well. I think South Africa just had a point to prove. Getting kind of nobody really expected them to win last week, so I think that South Africa were coming out all guns blazing and wanted to prove a point. And Eddie Jones made a comment that they kind of just stick it in the toaster, which I thought was brilliant. But because they don't do the basics sometimes, they just kind of try so much fancy stuff that they forget what the core bits of rugby are. So I think this time they didn't just stick it in the toaster. They went back to the basics, kind of did what they knew what they needed to do, and they benefited from it. But yeah, still a close game. Credit to Australia, they are looking really dangerous, and I'm excited to see what they can do in the next few years leading up to the World Cup. But yeah, that first half, like you say, weren't blown away. It was just, I think, class creeping in from South Africa.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right with what you say about sticking it in the toaster there with Eddie Jones. Just they went straight back to basics, straight. It wasn't even like I debated in the last podcast with myself, I suppose. Thank you very much for joining me. That whether what sort of game plan they would come out with this week, and I think Rassie had sort of said throughout the week that they had overplayed last week. It was too much, that it was all for having a game plan and all that, but they needed to sort of consolidate their pressure with points last week, and they didn't do that. And I think this week they certainly knew when to kick it and when to go for it, go for the jugular. And I think towards the end of that first half, that was a real key moment, I feel like, in that game. With that Quagga Smith try, I think they were just very clinical in that first half, and it was a decent performance. It wasn't without its drawbacks, really. I don't think they controlled the game as much as we've seen them control in the past. And especially when you move into that second half with the Wallabies scoring early after that lovely kick through by James O'Connor, bounces up, Moody misses it, Jorgensen scores yet again. I mean, how many tries has he been scoring recently?
He's good, isn't he?
He's been unbelievable recently, and it was really tight in that second half, really cagey for that spell after that try till that try from Pangamosa, who made this, who put 1 point in it with a kick from O'Connor, which just didn't quite go over, and then the Springboks go up the other end, and ball's knocked on by Kellaway, and then they bundle over with Epsabeth, and it's just that wee bit too far ahead of the Wallabies. But I think it was a lesson in the Springboks taking their opportunities in this half and taking their chances, and the Wallabies just perhaps not having enough on there. You speak about the injuries to White. I think Tom Wright also came off. Looks like nasty ACL injury. I think that's ended his Rugby Championship as well. But yeah, they just weren't able to take those opportunities. I think a lot of people were saying a key difference was that Handré Pollard and O'Connor off the kicking team. Handré Pollard, one of the best in the game, one of the best to do it, and then James O'Connor just didn't quite have his kicking boots on in that second half and missed that kick after a try from Pangamosa, and then missed those two late penalties to even get them a losing bonus point. But sort of, how does this sort of set up? Both teams will have a week break now after there's two opening fixtures. All Blacks will come and try and test South Africa's mettle, and the Wallabies will obviously host Argentina. Where does it leave both teams, do you think?
Still with a lot to do. It's early into the championship, so obviously there is, like I said, there is a lot to do still from all teams involved, all four. I think for South Africa, they just need to play a lot more of that back to basics stuff, especially against a team like New Zealand, because they're not going to stand for any of it. They'll just, they'll come at them with physicality, and if they don't get right up to that standard, then that's where they're just going to leak so many points. Australia, I think, just keep building, keep going with what they're doing. Obviously, a couple of injuries are setting them back. So, with White out potentially for the next test, like you say, Tom Wright, he's going to be gone. It's just kind of managing that, I think, is what is going to be the tough thing for them going forward to, beat a very strong Argentinian side. And I'm really looking forward to those games, because obviously Argentina beat the Lions, beat New Zealand, but also lost to them, and then it's going to be really interesting. And New Zealand, I think they're good on their day. They are so good, and they just weren't on their day when they played on Saturday. So
yeah,
I think discipline.
Do you think, in terms of, you speak about where both teams are, do you think Joe Schmidt will be happier than Rassie after those two games?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think as we said throughout this series, Australia are in a, they're in a regrowth, they're in a transition phase. So for them to be able to, get results like this, beating South Africa one week, losing by only 8 points the next week, after the back of a very mixed Lions performances, kind of getting incrementally better. I think that, you can only be happy that your team's getting better. And as I say, with the injuries that they've been faced throughout this last 2 months, it's definitely really promising for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a case where I was looking at the game and I'm thinking, at what point do we stop looking at the Wallabies as, oh, go on the Wallabies, or go on the underdog team, and start to look at them as one of these contenders again? Because we've really had 4 games in a row there against top quality opposition, 2 against the Lions, starting in that second test in Melbourne, and 2 against the Springboks, where they have been toe-to-toe, those 2 teams. And when you combine that with what happened in the autumn, obviously with beating England, going toe-to-toe with them, smashing Wales and Cardiff, going up to Edinburgh, not maybe getting Scotland having a very good game against them, but then taking it to Ireland and Dublin as well. At what point do we really start to consider the Wallabies as a real contender for their home Rugby World Cup?
Now, I think I think we've done and I think we've done enough of. This is a transition phase. They're getting to their peak now. They are really rising, while other teams are kind of either staying a bit stagnant or declining a little bit. I think if you look at South Africa compared to the last World Cup, they're definitely not. If you put them here, they're not above that. They're not on par with it. They're definitely below it. So, and it's not to say that they're getting worse. It's just that maybe other teams around them are getting better, and that's definitely the case for Australia. So, yeah, I think we can get rid of all this motive about them being still in the transition phase. They're up there now. They are definitely going to be contenders that people are going to be scared to face in 2027. So, yeah, it's going to be really, really good.
And we've talked quite scathingly about them after that first Lions test, and how this is, Dan Bigger said in commentary, this is the worst side that a Lions team's ever faced on tour. And we sort of look at back at that now, and that game almost seems like an anomaly for the Wallabies. We sort of that game was just, they had the injuries, they weren't set up right for whatever happened. That looks like an anomaly when you compare it to their whole season, and where they've come from last year's Rugby Championship to this year's Rugby Championship. It's like they're actual legitimate contenders. I mean, you look at the table right now; they're sitting in second there. They're 1 point ahead of the Springboks even, and they'll head with two home games against Argentina, and they'll fancy themselves in those. But is it concerning for the Springboks here? We sort of went into this Rugby Championship and felt that they would sort of steamroll everyone, because they have all the depth in the world, they have all the quality in the world. They ran over, with respect, Georgia and Italy, who aren't, they're not the top level, but they ran them over. And is it concerning the past 2 performances against a growing Australian team, or do you think that's just more of a sign of where Australia are rather than where South Africa aren't?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's definitely a case of look at where Australia are at now, but I think there was also a bit of that people are getting used to Razzie's ways. Like they know how to crack his system, and once it's been done a couple of times, then it's easier to crack it again. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a case of South Africa in the pits a bit. I think it's just that, they're, as all teams do, they'll go through heaps and bounds of form and clicking and whatnot. But I think it's just they've faced a very fresh Australian team that are firing on all cylinders at the minute and haven't got the weight of the world on their shoulders compared to South Africa, who do.
Yeah, well, that's the price you pay when you're back-to-back world champions, I suppose, and it'll be interesting to see how they go into the rest of this Rugby Championship. If they can win the rest of this Rugby Championship, you speak about New Zealand at Eden Park. Luke highlighted that as a game that he really, really fancied them winning and breaking that historic run that New Zealand have been on there. And do you think the New Zealand tests will be the real sign of where the Springboks are with just over 2 years out to the World Cup?
Yeah, I think so. I think England played them. When was it? It was last summer. They went over to New Zealand and um, narrowly lost at Eden Park. So I think if England are that close and people are going, well, contenders and whatnot, then I think South Africa will really fancy themselves to go there and be like, we can do this. But I think England fans definitely thought, oh, we could do this, but Eden Park's it's a different place. It's, I don't think it's anywhere anybody wants to be facing the All Blacks really. But I think right now, if you say, is there one team who can beat New Zealand at Eden Park? Yes, it is probably the South Africans.
Yeah. Well, you speak about Eden Park. We'll move on to New Zealand, who didn't have the best of weekends against Argentina after a very impressive performance last week in Cordoba. So Argentina have won 29-23. Huge victory for them after last week's performance, where you sort of were expecting, can they go toe-to-toe with them? And then the reality bites where the All Blacks just show their class. They did come back into the game, of course, but you sort of felt there was a bit of a distance between the sides. What did you highlight as the key difference this week from Argentina's performance, where you thought they sort of have closed that gap?
I think physicality, definitely. Physicality and kicking were probably the two things that I picked up on. The speed at which Argentina were going at was mental, and even then, the power that they were going at them with it was ridiculous. So I think as well, the 2 yellow cards at the end of the first half for New Zealand probably hurt them a bit. So, and that's when obviously Gonzalez's try came. But they built a bit of scoreboard pressure at the start of the half as well. So yeah, it wasn't like they were, trying to cling on to the game. It was pretty level pegging. But then I think in the second half, it was just a couple of changes got made. They made those. I think they made 3 early changes to the start of the first half, the start of the second half, Argentina, and I think that just kind of that helped so much. So yeah, they just outclassed them. I don't know. Did New Zealand know what to do? Probably, but I think they were just kind of blown out of the water a little bit and just yeah.
I don't feel like they took the game. I mean, it was similar to last week in terms of territory, where Argentina had really most of the territory in that game, and they had 55% last week. I'm not sure what the stats were this week, but it seemed fairly similar. But I don't know, the All Blacks just didn't come out with the same really intensity from the start. I think the commentators were speaking when the game kicked off, the amount of emotion. It's always an emotional game when it's against Argentina, and they kick along to them and they just give them that opportunity to have an attacking platform, and that just sort of gets them going. I don't think they managed the game anywhere near as good as they did last week. I thought their line speed was a little bit off in terms of they got caught offside a couple of times, and line out accuracy wasn't quite the same. They didn't really go for their mauls last week. That was a really big thing for them. And when they did eventually, they scored at the near the end with Tokiahu, who scored his 3rd line-out maul try within a week. So why what do you think happened between? Why do you think it wasn't the same sort of game plan imposed? Or was it just Argentina's intensity that was so much different that the All Blacks just didn't foresee, or was it just the All Blacks just having an off day?
Okay, it's similar to the South Africa Australia talk. I think it's probably a bit of both. New Zealand definitely weren't firing on all cylinders. I think there was a bit of, I don't know. I think, like you said, you make some good comments, but like maybe a bit of tiredness in the sense that like they weren't as quick off the line. They weren't matching Argentina in many areas of the pitch, and so Argentina were capitalising on that, making the most of it. And like you say, with the kicks out downfield, when you've got a player like Santi Carreras, in that backfield, he's just one of the worst players you want to give it to. Him and probably Capawazzo, they're just two players that you just like, no, don't kick it to them, because they just can create magic out of nothing.
Carreras
So
was fantastic when he came on for Albornoz. We sort of thought when Albornoz went down injured after how he played in the loss last week, you think, is this gonna scupper their chances? But Carreras came on, he just managed the game, and he just put zip in it, and he just basically just stepped into exactly what Albornoz does. You speak about kicking there. I think it was quite interesting to see last week the way they sort of went for that high bomb kicking game, and it didn't work for them this week. You would say it probably did work for them with the aerial battle. What do you think was the difference there?
I don't know, because New Zealand's back three was unchanged, wasn't it?
Yeah. There's very little changes to the personnel from both sides, really, in terms of key changes.
I'm not too sure really, but I think maybe they just kind of fancied it a little bit more. Maybe it was conditions on the day, but they clearly just felt, maybe practiced it a lot in training, thought this is, we tried it didn't work as well, but we know it can work. So let's perfect it. Let's get it right. And let's expose them. And credit to them. Yeah, it really, really works, because they've just that back three, is it Malia Delgui and Carreras.
Mateo Carreras and Albert Carreras.
Yeah, Mateo Carreras. The three of them, they're good under the high ball. Like, they're nothing exceptional, but when you've got those three who are just just keep battering them, you're gonna get one eventually. So, and like I say, if they've practiced it in training, then they've reaped the rewards that they sowed.
Yeah, potentially just kicking to different spots, and you speak about that intensity as well. Maybe perhaps it is just that change in the minor changes in personnel as well, here and there. I mean, learning where Mateo Carreras, for example, coming in, he had a fantastic game. But yeah, I think it was that intensity, which I think was the key difference for them, and that is how Argentina play when they're playing at their best. And we've got to speak about the man, Paulo Matera. How good was he?
He's unbelievable. He was. When I talk about that physicality that they brought, he's the first one that comes to mind. He's just a nuisance. Like, if I was facing it, I think I'd just actively avoid him, because he's just everywhere, and just getting in your face and getting into every ruck and just disrupting. But he just does it with, he's not trying to be, look at me, look what I've just done. He's just doing his job. Like, it's just a 9 to 5 for him, kind of thing. Like, he'll get in, do the dirty work, come out, be happy about it. Like, yeah, he's just a different level of flanker. And
I'm sure you've seen the stat. He's started every single minute, or he's played every single minute of all 4 times they beat the All Blacks.
Oh, really? Well, to say they've only done it, that many times, he just shows as well how long he's been going. Because he's on 120 plus caps.
Yeah, 104. Yeah, it's around that. I think maybe 114, but that's an awful lot of.
It's a lot of international rugby. Yeah, and he doesn't look like he's slowing down anytime soon. So, yeah, he's just unbelievable. He's really, really, really good.
We move on to the similar sort of question, where it leaves the two sides. Argentina, who will travel to Australia and look to do what the Lions did, and sort of win the series within the championship out there. And then the All Blacks obviously looking to keep that Eden Park home record going against the double world champs. Where are these two sides at?
I think the matchups are very, very hard to call, because you've got Argentina and Australia, who are both kind of underdogs in this tournament. So they're facing off, but also putting in great performances against the two big boys in this tournament. So I think the way I kind of see it going is maybe again another 1-1 for both teams. I think New Zealand will keep their Eden Park record. but they'll lose in the other game. And yeah, again, I feel like Argentina, they're too good to not beat Australia at least once. But equally, depending on how the injuries go for Australia, I think they could fight back. But I would definitely see it more going towards a 2-0 Argentina rather than Australia winning both of them.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting that you speak about injuries there. Albornoz out for that series, for that tour of Australia. And you obviously speak on the other side, Taniela Tupu, will he be back in time with his finger injury? Well, obviously we know Tom Wright won't be back, so who steps in there is Andrew Kellaway, and then you've got your two concussions injuries in Juices Swally and Nick White, so it'll be interesting to see who comes back in for those two. But yeah, it'll be very, very, very interesting, and it's great that we've got this heading into round 3 of the Rugby Championship, where we've got 4 sides who have all won one game. I mean, it makes it much more of a spectacle. Definitely. Just to read down on where this sort of sides sit in the championship, New Zealand sit top with obviously that losing bonus point has helped them on 6 points, Australia on 5, South Africa on 4, and Argentina on 4. So that's the way it sits, Dom. Moving into those other 4 games, who do you see winning this?
Oh, I think New Zealand, because I think they've got the stamina to do it. I think they'll definitely, yeah. I'm gonna back them. I think Argentina really, really do have a good chance of lifting the trophy. Because if they play like they did against New Zealand, I think they could really give South Africa a run for their money when they play them. But I think if I'm going to go put a bit of a smart rugby head on, I'd say New Zealand to win the tournament. Just because they don't seem to be struggling too much with player personnel. Like, they've had the chops and changes here and there. Like Parker, he made his debut, played really well against Argentina in that last test. So, yeah, I think their man management is definitely seems to be better than the other teams in the tournament. So I think that could be a defining factor for them to help them.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go a bit safe with my prediction. I do think the Boks, when they've got this 2 weeks, I think they'll win the Rugby Championship, to be honest. Because I don't know, I feel like this week they weren't at their best, but they got the job done, and I feel like with another 2 weeks before the next game against the All Blacks, they'll understand the positives in both sort of different systems they've employed in that first test. With the sort of the fast phase play, sort of up the gut really, and then that more controlled performance. I think Rassi will probably look at a way of combining the two of those and sort of creating a system which sort of can come out at different stages of the game. And I think, yeah, just their quality and their strength and depth will probably pay in the end. But yeah, I do fancy a couple of more upsets for sure from Australia and Argentina, and I think it'll be very tight when you sort of look at the final standings. But that moves us into the Women's Rugby World Cup, which began this last Friday night with England versus the USA. Now the Red Roses, the 100% win record, I think in this year anyway. It won the Six Nations. You're looking at me strangely there, Dom. Is that an incorrect?
That's correct. I think they're actually on like a 26-game unbeaten run. So
yeah,
they're doing pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I thought I'd got that one right. So, yeah, they're doing all right, aren't they? When the Six Nations as well. But how do you assess their start to the tournament, when very comfortably there in a game they were expected to win really, but good performances from Ellie Kildon and a couple of the forwards as well, and Maud, a couple of the props, Botterman as well, with a couple of a lovely line break to score one of the tries. How do you assess their opening performance?
I mean, it's got to be the perfect start, hasn't it? I mean, USA, they're a big name in women's rugby, obviously, with all the stuff that was going on with Alona Meyer when she came to Bristol. So I think it was definitely the perfect game to start off the tournament, with, big names, like you say, like Hildon, like Alona Meyer. So yeah, but I mean, 69-7, it doesn't really get much better than that. And
Yes.
to have Ellie
Yeah.
Kildun, playing at her absolute best after a bit of an injury, time out, it's like, it's like she never left. But she is just incredible.
Rapid.
Like, she's rapid, she's got great feet, her kicking game as well is exquisite. Like the grubber that she put through for one of her tries or to set up a try was just awesome. And based on how New Zealand played against Spain, I think England will go all the way on to win this tournament.
Yeah, they let in a couple of points there. It was a bit of a surprise seeing that. But
Yeah,
you
they let
think
a try in at the end of the game.
So you think the Red Roses? You fancy them for the tournament, the whole tournament?
Yeah, absolutely. Last two tournaments, it's been narrow losses in the final to New Zealand, but I think the squad hasn't changed too much in the last few years, especially since the last World Cup. So I think carrying that forwards, and so long as Ellie Kildun stays fit, I can't see them losing.
Well, look, they have Samoa next, so it'll be very interesting to see how they come up against a very physical side there. There's another, I would say, just to drop into the mix, there's another contender in here for this tournament, Canada, who are world number twos, and their player Julius Schell, who scored 6 tries against Fiji in a 65-7 win, and created a little bit of Rugby World Cup history, Dom, by scoring the fastest ever hat trick. That was her first hat trick in women's and men's Rugby World Cup history. So there's a little bit of history there for you there. So they're a very exciting team as well. I mean, you look at the other results as well. We had two of the I guess the home nations, you could describe them, in Ireland, which was the game you were at, winning 42-14, and then Scotland putting Wales to the sword up in Manchester at Salford Community Stadium. So yeah, a lot of eye-catching results there, a lot of big scorelines. The Wallaroos starting off very well against Samoa, France nilling Italy, and as you said, which South Africa at the start, putting in a really great performance against Brazil. But it's very exciting to see this tournament moving forward. I think it's going to be I think we can all agree it's going to be absolutely huge for women's rugby, and we watch on with very eager eyes. But moving on, we've got another, obviously, you missed last week's news, Dom, or I had Thomas on the podcast. He seemed like the more suitable sort of rugby friend that we have to come on as a proud Welshman. But the Welsh Rugby Cuts, which were announced last week, what do you make of this?
It's mental. It's how the mighty have fallen. Wales seemed to be in such a great position a few years ago, and then all of a sudden they're having to cut 4 teams down to 2. It's really baffling because, like, obviously community rugby is so good there. It's their national, it's the national sport. Everybody plays it from a young age. I don't think I've met many Welshmen who haven't played rugby in their time. So yeah, I'm just confused as to how it's got to such a terrible position.
Yeah, well, it's as me and Thomas went in depth into the whole thing, and I think it's sad though to see that this is something that is they feel like they've needed to do, really, such a drastic change, which is literally going to take away people's clubs from them, and remains to be seen, of course, who's going to face the cut here, and what the sort of makeup is going to be in the fallout of it, especially with the upcoming season. What are your sort of thoughts on? There's sort of a couple of different proposals on the table, with 3 clubs and 4 clubs with equal and unequal funding as well. Well, obviously your preferred would be to keep the 4, but if you were someone sort of looking at the whole picture of it, what sort of would you propose doing, really? which is a very tough question, I admit.
Yeah. I think cutting it to two sides, I can see the pros in it, because then you've got, realistically, maybe not, you've got a west side and you've got an east side. So I think Cardiff are pretty much nailed on to stay, because, I mean, why would you get rid of the capital kind of thing? But then it is who kind of takes that second, potentially third spot. I think Dragons have always kind of been under the shadow of the Blues, so maybe they would be the ones to go. But then, what Scarlets have done, but the change of stadium, and bits like that, and Ospreys are kind of just a staple of Welsh rugby as well. So there's a lot of there's a lot of arguments that can be made for each team. So it's just, I don't envy anybody who's having to make this decision. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to see how it all pans out for sure. But either way you look at it, there's going to be disappointment.
Well, it's kicked off massive debates in our comments section on TikTok. I can tell you that for free, on the sort of merits of each team, ownership strengths and weaknesses, and new stadiums. There's just so much to really unpack with it. But hopefully we'll be able to get a couple more answers on that shortly. But that sort of concludes everything for this week on the Ruck and Roll show. Thank you very much for coming on, Dom. That was our Rugby Championship roundup for round 2, our roundup for the Women's Rugby World Cup, and our roundup on the Welsh Rugby Cups as well. So thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.